Welcome, everyone. We are here again with such an exciting interview for you today. We interviewed Stephanie Johnson here a little bit ago, and it was actually one of our more popular interviews. We've had several thousand views, and lots of excitement around it. So we're so excited to have you back today, Stephanie. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad to be back.
Glad to have you. So if you haven't met Stephanie before, she is an author, an educator. One of her books we're showing many times. We give it to a lot of parents. We recommend it to many of our clients, is on child development, and that's one of the areas that she's a specialist in. So with your specialty in child development, we love to work together, and really excited today because we're going to talk about a lot of questions parents have around milestones. And I know when you go to your pediatrician, they might say by this age you need this, by this age you need this. And Stephanie's going to share with you guys as parents today a new way to look at milestones and help you tie in what's actually more important than how fast they develop. And I think the cool thing that a lot of parents that I work with don't quite see the connection, but how these milestones and these movements are so important for brain development. So if you want to support your child with a healthy brain, that's what we're going to talk about today. So welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you, Dr. Ty.
So tell me, I know you have a kind of a different perspective on using the term milestones. So why don't you start talking about that a little bit?
Yeah, thank you. So what I've noticed when we use the term milestones, and it's kind of like a system of checking off points, right? So at 6 months, you'll see your baby do this. At 8 months, you'll see this. And what I found is that system lends itself to feeling like if you get there early, then you must have a really advanced child. And then on the opposite extreme of that, on the opposite end, if your baby's not doing that quite at that time, it can cause a parent to worry about that. So the languaging that I use in terms of looking at development from birth to walking is a sequence of development. So I'm proposing a sequence of development where each stage builds on the next. And so in that case, what I'm working with as parents is allowing baby to complete and indulge in each stage as long as she needs before we're really worried about when and getting to the next thing. I find that when we can slow parents down and let them realize the value of each stage and how that's wiring the brain, now we no longer have this race to walking, and we don't have parents thinking, she's not doing this at 6 months, or when is she going to walk? Because they can really slow down and see that what their baby is doing is wiring the brain and is setting up the nervous system for lifelong learning.
Got it. Okay. I think that's a great perspective. I think of it as trying a new sport where the first time you do it, your brain, your body, they're not very coordinated. You don't know what you're doing. And in order to get better, you need repetition, 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 because that's wiring the brain to get used to it. So is that similar what you're saying with these movements then? Is it's not about boom, 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 getting through them, but if your child actually spends significant amount of time in one area, it's just adding to that wiring?
It's adding to the wiring, and what people don't appreciate about these movements is that the brain and the nervous system is wiring through the movements. Mm-hmm. So where we once thought the goal is to get to a certain end mark as soon as possible, whether they skip things or not, now we're starting to learn that, actually, optimal nervous system development is done via the movement. And what I found is that many parents don't understand the connection, like you said, between the wiring of the nervous system and the movements. So I'll give you one example, like a real concrete example. Just keep in mind that any skills that are learned on the floor will become as natural as breathing and swallowing, right? So floor time is really important. We can talk about tummy time in a bit. But floor time is important because any movement pattern or any skill that's developed there will become as simple and as natural as blinking and swallowing for a child when they're older and in school. So for example, at about 4 months, you'll see your baby have this kind of like stance, two hands on the floor. Yeah? And I can show you. If I come back, I can show you. So I have my 2 hands on the floor and I have my toy in front of me. Yeah? So if I have to get that toy and I've got two-handed stance, a bilateral stance, what I have to do, Dr. Kai, is lean to one side so that I can move this one and grab it in and free up this arm. So how that translates to our children when they get older is this ability to stabilize one arm so the other one can be free. Now you might think, well, a child has a lot of opportunities to do that when they eat, when they're practicing writing later on. But what I'm trying to share with parents is that if that skill is hardwired on the floor when they're in a horizontal position, it goes to the hindbrain and it joins the other automatic functions like breathing, swallowing, blinking, heart regulation, so that when the child is older, sitting at the desk, the body mechanics are taken care of automatically, and it frees up the higher part of the brain to do the task of spelling, thinking about punctuation, thinking about their handwriting, and things like that.
Got it. Yeah, I know we've talked, and just knowing about child development, that sometimes something like handwriting, you get to a certain grade and all of a sudden you say, oh, my handwriting's sloppy or it's not coordinated, and you think it's the handwriting that needs to be solved. Well, what you're saying is it's these fundamental things in the brain never got connected and built up in the first place that could be leading to that down the road.
Yep, and sometimes we refer to them as the physical mechanics of learning. Mm-hmm. So we tend to take them for granted and think all of the learning is in the brain. But most of my school-age clients who come to see me because they're having trouble reading at grade level, symptoms of attention deficit disorder, sensory integration, anxiety, all of these learning challenges, the treatment that I use, we're actually revisiting infant movements to reorganize things that may have been skipped through or they didn't get a chance to do it, or in some cases it's because parents just didn't know and they didn't get a lot of floor time. In other cases it could have been an illness during that period of development or they had a cast on. But what I realized when I'm treating the school-age children is that the system is disorganized. There's no dysfunction and there's no deficit. It's just not organized optimally. So in this room all afternoon, I'm rolling around on the floor with school-age children to revisit these early steps. And so what a great opportunity for us to share with parents the value of letting the babies go through them in the first place, just to kind of set up for optimal development.
Wonderful. So when you say letting the babies go through that, what would some examples be that parents can or should be doing, and maybe some things that you see that are compromising that ability?
Yeah, really good question. So it's been documented that American babies spend 2/3 of their day in an apparatus that restricts their movements. So we know what these are. Sometimes they're necessary because they're car seats, and sometimes they're necessary so mom's hands can be free. But when you put it all together, it's 2/3 of a baby's day where they're not allowed to have their free movement on the horizontal surface of the floor, which is where all of this important wiring is going on. And so what I love to share with parents is that we will use the car seat for driving only, with a little wiggle room. If like you have one who's sleeping, you just don't want to wake them up. Understandable. It's freezing out. You got to keep them warm. All these things are understandable. But just start being aware of, gosh, how many hours is my baby unable to just move and wire her nervous system? Another thing I like to share is the use of the jolly jumpers and the exercisers and the bouncers and the seats that hold the children up. While they can be pretty seductive for busy parents who need a safe place for baby while they maybe take care of another child, take a shower, cook dinner, there are also other ways you can keep baby safe on the floor while they're getting their time. And I know that these have kind of gone out of fashion, but I like those old school pack and plays, right? Because it's a firm, flat surface for baby. They're safe from the dog, from other toddlers, but their movement isn't restricted. So trying to help parents find ways that during downtime when babies are playing, we really want them on back or tummy or on their sides, being able to move and not restricted or upright, because that horizontal axis is really the baby's home, and that's where their body and nervous system is orienting around in order to build the to then be upright later.
Yeah, we see that same thing with some of the jumpers or like bumble seat or whatever it is that the baby hasn't developed their own core strengths. So when you're forcing them to be upright, it's actually putting a lot of undue pressure and undue stress that shouldn't be there on their developing spine.
Yeah, so you have a really good vantage point of talking about how it puts undue stress and limits their physical development. And then if we add on top of that, when the baby is upright, we're accessing higher parts of the brain that really aren't scheduled to be wired and developed until later. And so the positioning of the body helps us know what part of the brain is being developed. And so since we know we want the hindbrain to develop first, sometimes it's even so-called reptilian brain, and that is helpful because when babies are on the floor, like a reptile is, rolling, doing their thing, then we know hindbrain is being developed. Now, if the baby is sat up in the bumbo, you spoke about all the physical detriments there could be, but now also we're using the cortex. So if I learn how to stabilize and mobilize while I'm upright, then later in second grade when I'm trying to learn to spell, the mechanics of the body are also done in my cortex, right? Because that's where I learned them. So it clouds the cortex, it overtaxes it, and it demands too much of it because we'd love to have the mechanics, like I said, be automatic, and that's what happens when the babies learn the skills on the floor. So those devices, I have to admit, I'm a busy mom myself, can be really seductive. But like I said, the old school pack and play, have an older sibling watch the baby for a minute, gating off areas of your home for safety while you have to be away in another room. Those are all good solutions. We want to avoid having the babies kind of trapped as much as possible.
Yeah, that's great. I think of when people talk about babies, they say, oh, babies should be eating, sleeping, and pooping. But actually, they should be moving as well, right? And I picture when you say, well, if they're spending 2/3 of their day in some sort of confined position, but they still have to sleep a whole bunch of the day, like suddenly that movement category doesn't even get addressed. So I see how vital that is.
Yeah, and there's a passage in the book too that kind of describes the average day of the American baby, right? Mom or dad wakes the baby up, maybe cuddles, gets dressed, puts him in the high chair for feeding, takes him from the high chair to the car seat, takes him from the car seat to the car, drives to daycare, takes him from that one. And so we go on and on and on and on and like this, and maybe the baby has had 20, 30 minutes on the floor to play, maybe in one day. And like I said, some of those, the car seat, we can't do much about because babies have to be safe in it, but I just remind parents it's just for driving. And the number for the car seat is 600 hours in the first year of life in that car seat.
Wow.
Yeah, and so I'm sure you guys do this in your practice too, just encouraging moms and teaching moms about other options like wearing them close to their body. My son was of wearing age in the winter, and I thought, how am I going to do this? I used to just wear his carrier under my coat, right? So I'd be driving to Target with the carrier on. He'd be safe in the car seat, and then I'd scoop him up, put him in the carrier. It was actually my dad's coat. I wore like this big old Papa Bear coat, and go in. And that took a lot of practice, and I had to figure out how am I going to not use the car seat because it seems like such a convenience. But there's so much value in having your baby be by you, feel you walking versus being taken around in that little bucket.
Yeah, and I imagine the security and the emotional, the bonding, everything that takes place there too. Mm-hmm. And I know you mentioned before when having baby on tummy, on the back, on their side, and I know tummy time is something that's gained a lot of popularity. And what is your thoughts on does a baby need a lot of tummy time, not much tummy time? What do you?
Yeah, so I'm glad that everyone seems pretty informed about the value of tummy time. I like to use the term floor time instead because there's so much value on baby playing on the back as well. And so I sort of tell parents there's increments of development. So from 0 to about 3 or 4 months, I say short, frequent bursts of tummy time, and that can be on you guys while you're laying down. Yeah? Then the rest of the time, I really like for those very little ones to be on their back, Dr. Ty, and I'll tell you why, because I'm sure your audience numbers are on their back, right? But here's why. When they're on their back, hope you can see my baby, they can start to fold their limbs into the center. And this finding the center is very important for being able to self-soothe. And it's really important for being able to pull things into them. So imagine a baby on their tummy, like I showed you when I got down on the floor. Their whole world revolves around this, right? They want to pull things in. And to develop that ability to pull things in, you have to be on your back. Your tummy is going to develop all this beautiful spine strength and lifting of the head, as we know. But you'll be more comfortable playing on your tummy if you develop the strength to pull things in as well. So, and I could go on and on and on about the values of back time. So I like to have kind of a rotation. Of course, when the babies are bigger, they're going to be able to roll wherever they want to go anyway. But for that first 4 months, short, frequent bursts on you, and a substantial amount of time on the back is what I like to see.
Okay. Can you speak to if a baby's on their back a lot? I think some parents might get the impression we've seen babies with flat heads, right? Can you share what you actually see as causing flat heads more often than just that time on their back?
Yeah, it's a really common concern. So when families come see me, I have the luxury of this space, and I can say, well, Mom and Dad, get on the floor. Go on your back for me. And so if you're in the audience right now, and you can, just get on the floor. And what you'll notice is that, look at this. You can move your head from side to side. Huh? Where you cannot move your head to side is if you are in this position. Yeah, do you see this position? If I'm in my car seat, and I've got that nice little safety for my neck, right? We've got those, and you try to track stimulus and move, you cannot. And so children really are in that position 600 hours a year. It's much more likely that that is contributing to the flat head than being on their back. Because a child on their back doesn't, right? They're free to move their head. And you can really sense that when you lay on the floor and move your own skull around, that, oh yeah, I can see where that wouldn't be the case.
Right, you can actually feel it start to shape.
Yeah, you can feel it start to shape. Mm-hmm. It's these positions where they're kind of stuck in a 45-degree angle, which isn't conducive really to feeling out gravity and orienting yourself anyway. So I think it's the car seat that is more likely to be a culprit for that flat head. Understandable concern, though, because I get a lot of calls about that.
Right. And the padding is great for safety.
Yeah,
it's going to keep your baby safe in an accident, which is what it's designed to do, but not designed for optimal development. So.
Exactly, and so therefore we just use it when they're at risk of that accident perhaps happening. And so while your older sibling is at gymnastics or piano lessons, they're safe, so they don't need to be in the car seat for that. Mm-hmm. They can be held, they can be on the floor, we figure something else out. Okay. I think it's the overuse of the car seat that we're really talking about, because of course they need to be used.
So once a baby's spent time on the floor and they're moving side to side, they're pushing up, they're reaching in, and now they start to sit up, they start to crawl, move around. What are some of the next stages that babies go through, and how can parents, what to look out for, what to promote during those next steps?
Yeah, so this marker is a big one. This is a 4-month marker where they're going to be bilateral and they start to lean. And shortly after that, they'll start to rotate and roll themselves. Now this is where what I'm going to say is going to sound a little bit different than our traditional milestone checkoffs, because traditionally we have sitting independently at 6 months. And so that might be true for like a quick sitting, if everyone's having dinner and baby needs to sit for a little bit in the high chair, they might be able to kind of like hoist them, like be up for a minute. Mm-hmm. They're really in no position physically ready for the sitting up. And I'll tell you why, Dr. Ty, because that full rolling to both sides is getting their lateral strength ready. And then also the lizard crawling that we like to see them do must precede the sitting so that they can get their core nice and strong. When they're pushing those little feet into the floor doing their lizard crawl, their tummies are getting so strong, right? So what I like to tell parents is, maybe at 6 months you can sit them in the high chair, like I said, but you don't want to sit them in the middle of the floor and just be like, okay, 6 months, let's see what happens. Because we'll find a way to sit there, but it's not optimal, right? They're going to be bracing through the lower back, they're going to brace their hips. What we like to see is for the babies to push up on their own. And so I'm constantly telling parents they will learn how to sit. When they learn how to sit, they have to push through their upper body and find this balance of their head and tail, but their sides are ready for it because they've done the rolling and the lizard crawling. So if you've done rolling and lizard crawling, you're probably not going to push yourself up till 9 or 10 months, and that's much further past the 6-month marker. So I think that's the one I get the most questions about is, oh my gosh, they're not sitting. And I'm always telling parents, be patient. What are they doing? They're gaining strength for sitting. You want them to push themselves up to sitting, because when they can push themselves up, then they can also go to crawl. They can take that weight on their hands. We run the risk of them scooting on their bottoms, like this, when we sit them up too early and they're not ready. If they haven't taken that weight on their hands pushing up to sitting, then if they want to go get that toy over there, rather than going on the hands and knees and crawling, they're going to do something like this. Yeah? Which is super cute, and everyone loves to see a butt scooter, but it's a sign that something hasn't organized optimally, and perhaps things have been skipped.
Got it. Yeah, I noticed some of the babies in our office, when it feels like they're sitting up too early, I notice one of two things. Either one, they're just kind of, like you see them starting to collapse forward, right, and all the tone is dropping. Yeah. Or two, they're always losing themselves and tipping over on their own. So I think those are good examples.
I'm going to add 3. I'm going to add a third one. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you can't see it unless you're trained like us to see it. But they'll get really stiff hips. Their legs might be out like this to kind of balance them, like kickstands. And if they're strong enough to sit in their core, their legs can be bent. They can move around. They can shift positions. They can play with their hands in the blocks. A good sign that your child is sitting too early is if they can't really do much while they're there because they're using all their energy to kind of hoist themselves up, right? It's different if you just let that one wait. Okay. That's probably the most controversial thing I say is sitting doesn't really need to happen until they can push themselves up. But I think once parents understand the reasoning and the mechanics of that, then it doesn't seem so ridiculous to let them wait for that one.
Yeah. And to keep in mind, as we talked about in the beginning of this interview, is it's not only the physical piece that we're concerned about, but it's their brain development, and letting them push themselves up gives that lower brain time to really solidify before they start activating the frontal brain for future. That's going to set them up for better learning in the future.
Yeah, and here's a really good example of that while we're talking about physical stuff. You'll see them kind of rock hands and knees when they're getting ready to creep and crawl from that sitting position. And what they're doing is they're going far, near with the eyes, and they're practicing that near-far focus exchange, which we need for everything, right? We need it for looking at the teacher, looking at her paper, looking out, looking at the map. We need that near-far focus, and so in order for it to become automatic, all that time rocking on the floor is one of those places where that happens. Not to mention, I can't even believe I didn't bring up, with the lizard crawling, the babies are going to be looking at their thumbs, right? And so that horizontal eye tracking, which is
you need
so
for reading, right?
So key for reading. And when the children come to my office and their parents say, gosh, he's so bright, he's had such language command, but he's really not picking up reading, and we're concerned, as teachers are concerned. First thing I do is have them get down on the floor and see how their lizard crawl organized. Their lizard crawl didn't organize, which tells me they didn't lizard crawl. Then I do some horizontal eye checking, and I say, wow, this is really a matter of the eyes aren't supporting the cortex as it tries to read, and now the cortex is busy trying to move those eyes, which should be as automatic as blinking and swallowing. The whole story starts again. So yeah, every time we talk about a movement development, just know that we're also talking about a piece of school readiness and brain wiring as well.
Yes, that's so huge.
Yeah.
What about then after, so you're sitting up, now you said they start to look up, look down, look up, look, as they're near and far, and that's going to start them
sitting, and they'll do
crawling.
this, and then they're going to be off to creeping.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so I think most folks know that the creeping on hands and knees is good for integrating the two hemispheres, right? Because we're doing a cross-lateral action.
Mm-hmm.
And so I get everybody really wants to rush to creeping. If they're not rushing to walking, they're rushing to creeping. Like, they get calls, when is my baby going to crawl for real? And I think to myself, oh, I bet they're belly crawling right now. When are they going to crawl for real? But just know that there's all these other cycles and things that precede the crawling and the cross-lateral action. That's really the biggest, most sophisticated, fancy ta-da that we have in early childhood development in terms of this sequence from 0 to creeping or 0 to walking. The creeping will just be followed up by pulling up, and now I'm going to start to toddle a little bit. But I don't really need to see that happening until between 12 or 15 months. Lots of parenting books will wrap things up in a year. They like to wrap things up in a year. Your baby will be walking by a year, which is nice and tidy, right?
Then you're
packaging things up. But it's not very sound information for parents. And in my little group of colleagues, we used to joke when we were all having our babies that while most people are bragging about how early their children walked, we're on Facebook like, oh my gosh, my baby didn't walk until he was 16, being braggadocious about how long it took. So that rush is a real thing. But I say walking by 15 or 16 months, as long as they've done the other things, is a perfect time to start walking.
Wonderful. And do you see any significant red flags or anything that parents can be looking out for along the way? Or maybe they have an older child right now and they want to reflect back. Anything that would be more noticeable in your mind that they should be looking out for?
Well, for the older children, parents kind of know what behaviors are making them curious, and so sometimes it's useful to backtrack and say, oh, I wonder what they missed. And sometimes it's not very useful to play detective work like that. It can make one feel kind of bad about one's parenting. So what I like to say is if you're noticing something or you remember that your child didn't do something, you're just learning about this now, the beauty is that if you get your child back on the floor, which is what I do with my school-age clients, the brain will start to reorganize. So anytime you can initiate play that happens on the floor going through the tunnel, now we're pretending like we're snakes, we're going to have a lizard race. For the length of this song, nobody can walk on their feet. There's fun ways to make sure your child is getting back on the floor, rolling up and down the hills outside. Any way we can get them off their feet and back on that horizontal axis can really help reorganize and buff things out in a fun way without having to seek therapeutic counsel again.
Got it.
For the babies, I say, I think it's important for us to know that if we get out of their way and provide the space, they are wired to go through all these movements naturally. And if you see your baby is kind of has stiff limbs and it's hard for them to move, that might be an indication to go see somebody like you or call me. Because when the limbs aren't able to move, and you can tell this even in a newborn if they have a tendency to be kind of stiff or have really high tone, it's going to be tricky for them to move through all of the other milestones. So I guess that's what I look for, is a balance between extension tone, which is a straightening, and folding tone. And if they have that balance, it's most likely that they'll move through things so long as they have the time and space, and that you're not walking them, at 8 months, putting them on their feet, walking them across to grandpa or something. We want to avoid teaching things they're not ready for.
Got it. I think those are huge tips, and I think if you are a parent watching, and like you said, it's easy to look back and say, oh man, I can't believe I didn't know this, but it's something that the reason we get so passionate about sharing these things is because so many parents don't know this, because I think with our, it used to happen so naturally when we were thousands of years ago, when we put our baby on the ground outside and everything happened, and society's changed so quick, and it's influenced this ability for our babies to develop, like you said, when they're spending 2/3 of the day confined. You have to be more on the leading edge or looking into the brain science in this new respect to really realize why this change has happened. And that's why unless you're actively seeking this information, you're not going to get it. So.
No, you're not going to get it, and you won't get it at places where you would think. I can't tell you, Dr. Ty, how many parents of older children say to me, this seems pretty basic. How come nobody told me this when he was a baby? And I was struggling with that for a while too, because I thought, why aren't, but what I've decided, or what I've learned is that we are all learning, and nobody is really, teaching this or knowing this quite yet. There's very few people, so it's brand new, and I like to remind families that we're always learning new things, and it wasn't so long ago that the baby sloshed around in the back seat while we drove, or we were smoking while we were pregnant. And so it is my hope in 20, 30 years we look back and we say, I can't believe we put them in the Jolly Jumpers. I can't believe we put them in those bumbos. And we look back and are horrified by it. And that will take some time. But just to remember that professionals are constantly learning too. And so I don't know about you, but I'm pretty sure my mom and all her friends were smoking and drinking, and it wasn't frowned upon while pregnant with us. And now that's pretty frowned upon. And as a society, we've decided, let's try to tell moms to not do that. Let's help moms not do that. That's not healthy for babies. So I feel like that's the stage we're in right now. We're just starting to get the word out and just starting to tell moms, let's let them move a little bit more.
Yeah, and I get so excited because I know how powerful it is when our babies, and we're designed to develop optimally, right? And it's only when these things get removed that all of a sudden these learning issues come up, or reading or writing in school, and social skills. All these things get influenced down the road, that if we can intervene early and teach these skills early, or even if a parent is struggling with some of these skills later in life, actually knowing the root cause of it, why it's happening and what they can do about it. I think that's so empowering for you guys as parents out there watching. So we appreciate you being on today, Stephanie, and another opportunity to interview you.
Thank you, Dr. Ty.
Yeah, so if you guys, as you're watching this out there as parents, if you do have questions, feel free to put any questions in the comments below. And we'll also, again, we'll put your info in Stephanie as far as links, how they can get a hold of you. Like we said, we definitely recommend reaching out to Stephanie with developmental questions. Her Baby Bear book, as mentioned, is a wonderful resource for parents and going really in depth. And the cool thing is it's well written. There's lots of pictures going into really the details of what we're talking about today. So if you're a parent looking for a really comprehensive resource, that book is wonderful. So thank you guys for watching.
It's read even if you're tired, Dr. Ty. We wrote it so even the most tired parents could find something useful in there.
Exactly. And the nice thing is, even if you're tired, you're doing these things, it's going to make your job easier. As you go through life. This is like the easiest
parenting advice. It's like, don't do anything, just put them on the floor.
Just put them on the floor and let them roll around. Oh, sweet.
All right.
All right. Well, thanks again, Stephanie.
Thank you. See you soon, Dr. Ty.
See you guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.